Hello, my name is Jayesh. Welcome to the session that discusses implementing the new Transfer Service Request Process Flow capability, which is available from the 21A release of Oracle Utilities Customer Cloud Service. In this session, we will talk about this new feature and how it can impact your business. We will give you an overview of the new capability and the benefits to your business. Then we will explain what you need to consider when implementing this feature in your business. Finally, we will provide you with some additional resources. The new Transfer Service Request Process Flow capability helps call center agents process transfer service requests efficiently in a consistent manner by guiding them through the common steps and actions for transferring service. Here are some of the major highlights of the new capability. There is a visual representation at the top of the process flow screen, so a call center agent can easily see how far along they are in a process flow. At the end of a process flow, a final summary displays key information related to the request. A call center agent can save an in-progress process flow. A saved process flow can then be resumed at a later stage to continue processing the request. One or more additional persons may be attached to the account linked to the transfer service request. For this, there is an inline person searching capability to allow a call center agent to easily identify and then link additional persons to the account. If required, they can also unlink additional persons that are already linked to the account. For example, a flatmate who will no longer be associated with the main account holder. A call center agent can also capture new and updated details for certain predefined attributes. Configurable insights can be surfaced on process flows. These can highlight important information to a call center agent about the premise, service, and/or account. There are also a large number of business controls or configuration options and extension points to support various business requirements. Finally, there is also support for prerequisite processing to meet implementation-specific requirements. For further details about using this new capability, please refer to the Using Transfer Service Request Process Flows video. In this implementation advice section, we will go through what you need to configure to enable the Transfer Service Request Process Flow capability in your business. There are three main tasks that you should complete to enable the new capability. First, you define the possible insights or information to be highlighted on the applicable Transfer Service Request Process Flow panels. This occurs via insight types and insight groups. There are several insight types already provided. To highlight additional insights, you can configure new insight types to meet your business needs. You must configure insight groups for the three specific insight classes shown here if the groups do not already exist. You will then update each insight group with the insight types to be highlighted. The applicable process flow panels use these insight groups to determine which insights to highlight. Next, you must configure one or more customer service request types for transfer service request processing. These contain the business controls or configuration options and extension points to support various business requirements. Process flows and back-end customer service requests use these for processing transfer service requests. Multiple customer service request types may be required if the business controls or configuration options and/or extension points differ between jurisdictions, that is, CIS divisions and customer classes. Finally, you must configure an action method for transfer service request processing. When initiating a transfer service request, the solution initially creates a process flow and a parent customer service request. The process flow type and customer service request type for these are derived from the action method. Now, this demonstration will go through what you need to configure to enable the Transfer Service Request Process Flow capability. As mentioned earlier, the first task is to define messages or insights that may be displayed on the applicable steps or panels of process flows for transfer service requests. This is via insight types and insight groups. If insight types do not exist for the various messages or insights you want displayed, you can configure these on the Insight Type admin page. Here you define the main information for each insight type. This includes the visual structure, and you also specify the algorithm that determines the message to be displayed. You also specify the visual settings to be applied to the message or insight, for example, colors. Next, you create insight groups if these do not exist for the three specific insight classes shown earlier. It is these insight groups that process flows based on the base product delivered transfer service related process flow type interrogate to determine which messages or insights need to be displayed. For each insight group, you define the valid visual structure applicable to the insight group and the various insight types that may be displayed on process flows. The example here is shown for the Start-Stop Transfer Insights account-based insight class. You can see that the valid visual structure applicable to this insight group is List Insight, and the insight type that may be displayed. The second task is to define one or more customer service request types for transfer service requests. There are 7 sections that contain various configuration options, these being Main, Characteristics, UI Override Controls, Start Service Controls by Customer Class, Stop Service Controls, Account Controls, and Person Business Controls. We will now look at each of these in a bit more detail. In the Main section, the main configuration options are the various business objects to be used to process transfer service requests based on this customer service request type. Here, you specify the parent customer service request business object which manages the overall transfer service request. You also specify the various child customer service request business objects which will be used for creating and or updating person, account, service agreement, and premise records. Next, the characteristics section is used to define characteristics, both type and value, to be associated with this customer service request type. The UI Override Controls section allows you to completely override the summary header on process flows for transfer service requests with a custom replacement UI section. Now, in the base product delivered transfer service related process flow type, each panel is built up of nested or included data areas that define the HTML to present information to a call center agent. When a customer service request type indicates a UI section is to be overridden, an extension data area replaces the UI component of the base product delivered data area with a custom replacement UI section. For more information about overriding the summary header UI section, refer to the Understanding UI Override Controls section in the Customer to Meter Administrative User Guide. The third section is Start Service Controls by Customer Class. Here you define various configuration options at each customer class level to be used by process flows that reference this customer service request type. This is for the premise the customer is moving into as part of the transfer service request. These are primarily used by the Services to Start and Person and Account Details panels. There are 7 subsections, these being Common Service Controls, Deposit Service Controls, Premise-Based Service Controls, Additional Service Controls, Premise Controls, and Customer Contact Controls. We will now look at each of these in a bit more detail. The Common Service Controls subsection enables you to force call center agents to use a date picker when populating the start date on the Services to Start panel. This prevents them from mistyping the start date. In addition to this, you can specify an algorithm to validate that the entered date is within a reasonable range. You can also define whether the Standard Industrial Classification Code, Business Activity, and Start Requested By fields are displayed for call center agents to populate when selecting Services to Start. The Deposit Service Control subsection defines the configuration options around deposits for transfer service requests. This is primarily used by the Deposit section on the Services to Start panel. Here you define whether a deposit is required, never required, or will be evaluated by an algorithm. You can plug in your own implementation-specific algorithms which contain the logic for the business rules to determine if a deposit is required. If a deposit may be required, you specify a number of default configuration settings and also define how deposits will be billed, in one single amount or in installments. If billed by installments, you have the recurring charge settings of billing by installment amount, number of installments, or both. In addition to this, you can specify various limits such as minimums and maximums to be applied to the installment amount or number of installments respectively. The Premise-Based Service Control subsection is used for premise-based services. This is primarily used by the Services to Start panel and when pending service agreements are being created. The determine services to start algorithm is used to get a list of service agreements to start for service points at the starting premise. These are displayed on the services to start panel. You can also indicate whether the customer read and allow estimate premise-based service agreement attributes can be displayed for call center agents to populate. The process services to start algorithm is used to create pending start service agreements for all services to be started, including deposit, service point base, and additional services. Now, if the base product delivered algorithms for these plugin spots do not meet an implementation's business rules, you can plug in your own implementation-specific algorithms. In addition to this, you can also define whether start service note fields are available for call center agents to populate when selecting services to start. This is typically used to capture notes to pass to field activities for starting service. You can define whether these are captured at the premise level, which will apply to all service points linked to a premise, and/or at the service point level. The additional service control subsection is related to starting service agreements for non-deposit and non-service point based services as part of the transfer service request process. Recurring charitable contributions is one example. This is used by the additional service agreements section on the services to start panel. If additional service agreements may be started, the service agreement type search option in this panel retrieves various service agreements for additional service agreements you may want to start. This is based on the SQL in the additional SA's search zone. If you want to further restrict the service agreement types that may be selected from, you can plug in your own implementation-specific override search zone here. The default additional services to start grid is used to display pre-selected additional services you may want to start. The call center agent can choose not to start these pre-selected additional services. Now, the premise control subsection is used to indicate which predefined premise attributes, if any, can be updated when starting service at the move into premise. You can indicate which attributes to display on process flows, which attributes not to display, or which ones to only display if there is existing information. This last setting is useful if you want to verify if existing information is still accurate, but the transfer service request is not focused on collecting this information. Finally, the customer contact control subsection is used to indicate if you want to create a customer contact when starting service. Here, you can specify the customer contact class and customer contact type for the customer contact to be created. The Stop Service Controls section allows you to define various configuration options for stopping service. This is for the premise the customer is moving out from as part of the transfer service request. These configuration options are used by the services to stop panel of process flows that reference this customer service request type and the initiating logic to stop service agreements. The Disable Manual Service Date checkbox enables you to force call center agents to use a date picker when populating the stop date on the services to stop panel. This prevents them from mistyping the stop date. In addition to this, you can specify an algorithm to validate that the entered date is within a reasonable range. You can also define whether the stop requested by field is to be displayed for call center agents to populate. In addition to this, you can also define whether stop service note fields are available for call center agents to populate when selecting services to stop. This is typically used to capture notes to pass to field activities for stopping service. You can define whether these are captured at the premise level, which will apply to all service points linked to a premise, and/or at the service point level. The Determine Services to Stop algorithm is used to get a list of service agreements that are eligible to stop for the account. The base product delivered algorithm includes both premise-based and non-premise-based service agreements. These are then displayed on the Services to Stop panel. The Process Services to Stop algorithm is used to transition selected active service agreements to pending stop. These transitions occur via service agreement-related child customer service requests. Now, if the base product delivered algorithms for these plugin spots do not meet an implementation's business rules, you can plug in your own implementation-specific algorithms. The next lot of configuration options in the Stop Service Control section may be used to remove or filter the service agreements that are returned by the algorithm in the Determine Services to Stop algorithm plugin spot. For more detail, refer to the inline help on the customer service request type and detailed descriptions on related algorithm types. Now, the premise control subsection is used to indicate which predefined premise attributes, if any, can be updated when stopping service. You can indicate which attributes to display on process flows, which attributes not to display, or which ones to only display if there is existing information. This last setting is useful if you want to verify if existing information is still accurate, but the transfer service request is not focused on collecting this information. Finally, the customer contact control section is used to indicate if you want to create a customer contact when stopping service. Here, you can specify the customer contact class and customer contact type for the customer contact to be created. The account control section is used to indicate which additional predefined account attributes, if any, may be updated when transferring service. You can indicate which attributes to display on process flows. The Person Business Control section allows you to define various configuration options used by the Person and Account Details panel of process flows that reference this customer service request type. The first lot of configuration options are used when searching for other persons to add to the account. You can indicate if the person search capability should include options to allow searching by phone and/or email details. You can also replace the base product delivered person search service script if you want to implement a different kind of search compared to what the base product delivered search script offers. The remaining controls in the Person Business Control section allows you to define various configuration options separately for persons or individuals and businesses. Let's look at person controls first. The first part of the person control subsection is used to indicate which predefined person-related attributes, if any, may be updated when transferring service. You can indicate which attributes to display on process flows, which attributes not to display, or which ones to only display if there is existing information. This last setting is useful if you want to verify if existing information is still accurate, but the transfer service request is not focused on collecting this information. Some of the attributes that may be configured for possible updating include life support and sensitive load notes, other person names and identifiers, person contact information, person characteristics, paperless billing option, and bill route type. The second part of the person control subsection is related to other persons on account. You can indicate if you want other persons that are linked to the account for a transfer service request to be displayed on a process flow. You can also define the primary identifier types that may be used in person searches for any additional persons you want to add to the account. Additionally, you can configure which specific predefined attributes, if any, may be updated for these additional persons when transferring service. In the Business Control subsection of the Person Business Control section, you are able to define similar configuration options as in the Person Control subsection, but for business customers. The third task to enable the transfer service request process flow capability is to define an action method for the transfer service action method role if one does not already exist. If one does exist, you will need to update this action method. This action method is referenced when you click the transfer service hyperlink in the premise tree dashboard zone. Here, you define the default type of process flow to be initiated for a transfer service request and the customer service request type that will be referenced by the process flow. You also have the option to plug in override process flow types and customer service request types for transfer service requests if this is applicable to an implementation. For additional information about the new transfer service request process flow capability, please see the Oracle Utilities Customer Cloud Service Library on Oracle Help Center, which is available at docs.oracle.com. This concludes this presentation. Thank you for watching.